So today's transit talk is redefining safety on transit. So our panelists are going to discuss development on fare enforcement policy in our region, as well as building more inclusive spaces on public transportation. So as someone who used to work with chronically homeless individuals, like Regina said, I saw firsthand how fare enforcement policies have impacted some of our lowest income neighbors. More recently, again, like Regina so beautifully stated, I worked with U District Let's Go on transportation access specifically in the U District. So I had the opportunity to engage several community members around the realities and impacts of how fare is enforced on various transit systems. So we are joined by an excellent panel of experts and leaders from a variety of organizations, all with really unique perspectives on today's topic. And I'm really looking forward to our discussion about what your conversations around fare enforcement have looked like and how that has influenced some of the changes we are going to be discussing this evening. So I'm really honored to be moderating tonight. Again, this is such a great group of dedicated and effective leaders in our community. So you all have worked tirelessly to get things done, and we appreciate you. Thank you. So before we begin our discussion today, I just want to briefly introduce all of our speakers. Their full bio is in your handout, and after I introduce them, we're going to do a quick round robin of where is your favorite place to visit off a transit stop in the summer. Okay, and then we'll go into brief presentations by everyone. So each panelist is going to have approximately 5 minutes to present their work on this particular subject. And after that, I'll spend a few minutes asking follow-up questions of my own and facilitating panelist responses to each other. So our first speaker is going to be Abel Pacheco. So he spent nearly 10 years working, living, and going to school in Northeast Seattle, and is proud to represent Northeast Seattle's District 4 as its appointed city council member. Congratulations. I know you have food in your mouth, but I know you're saying you're welcome in your head. Abel got his degree in political science from California State University, Northridge, before earning his master's in public administration from the Evans School of Public Policy and Government at the University of Washington. Professionally, Abel began his career in Seattle at the Seattle Foundation, working to develop place-based strategies before joining the Seattle Police Foundation to work strategically with the Seattle Police Department's community outreach team and the Office of the Chief to develop community partnerships. And for the last 4 years, Abel worked with the University of Washington's Office of Minority Affairs and Diversity, most recently serving as the Director of Strategic Engagement for the UW's Washington Mathematics, Engineering, Science Achievement Program to increase opportunities for students of color and young women in STEM. Abel currently chairs the Planning, Land Use, and Zoning Committee, serves as Vice Chair of the Sustainability and Transportation Committee, and serves as a member of the Gender, Equity, Safe Communities, New Americans, and Education Committee. Thanks for being here. Next is Alison Eisinger, who is the Executive Director of the Seattle-King County Coalition on Homelessness, affectionately known as SCITCH. Whose members work collaboratively for safety, housing, justice, and to end the crisis of homelessness. 30 years of practice at the intersection of social work, public health, and community organizing have honed her ability to analyze and improve public policies and engage others in creative advocacy and effective problem solving. With community partners, the coalition's advocacy led to the establishment of Orca Lyft, which is a low-income fare program in King County. Her formative years on New York City subways and buses convinced her that good public transit is a democratizing force. Alison is affiliate faculty at the University of Washington School of Public Health. Thank you for being here. Next is Cathy Jimenez. She is the program manager for King County Metro's Fare Violation Program. Cathy is responsible for implementing this new program designed to foster transportation equity in fare enforcement that many transit agencies struggle with appropriately applying. Cathy ensures accessibility to violation resolution options developed through a work group of community advocates and stakeholders and identifies barriers individuals may have to resolving their fare violations or sustainably accessing transit service. Cathy fosters partnerships with stakeholders to share what is learned through fare enforcement in order to inform policies on fares and other access to mobility efforts. Cathy has worked for King County for over 10 years and with King County Metro for the last 5. Cathy has lived in King County for 18 years and is native to Oakland, California, where her experience included work in the public and nonprofit sectors focused on community and economic development as well as human services. Thanks, Cathy, for sharing your insight with us tonight. Eli Steffen is a bus driver, artist, and community organizer. Raised on Vashon Island, Eli has long understood the need for safe, accessible transit and the havoc lack of it can cause. Growing up, Eli remembers the countless instances of drunk driving deaths and injuries in their small town. Transit saves lives. Eli is proud and grateful for the opportunity to help people get where they need to go in a safe manner for them and others. As an artist and organizer, Eli's work focuses on the intersection of identity, community, and systemic violence. Thanks, Eli, for getting us around. Next is Rhonda Carter. Rhonda is the Chief of Staff in the CEO's office at Sound Transit, where she oversees day-to-day front office operations, supports the CEO in communicating and managing agency priorities and strategic initiatives, and collaborates with the executive team and other staff to assess and elevate issues of critical importance. A dedicated public servant, before joining Sound Transit in August 2016, Rhonda worked and lived in Washington, D.C. for 10 years. From 2008 until 2016, she worked for the federal government as an appointee, serving, respectively, in the White House, the U.S. Department of Energy, and the U.S. Department of Transportation. Rhonda began her career as a program coordinator in the Office of Minority Affairs and Diversity at the University of Washington, Seattle. Represent. Fond of schools named for where they are located, she's a graduate of Federal Way High School in Federal Way, Washington. And Claremont McKenna College in Claremont, California. Rhonda resides in South Seattle with her husband and their toddler. All right, so let's get started with some warm-up questions. Well, just one warm-up question. This will be a quick round robin. So for the audience, please restate your name, your pronouns, and your favorite place to take transit during the summertime. I would love to start. So Laura Lee, my pronouns are she, her, and my favorite place to take public transit in the summertime, I love to take the water taxi to West Seattle and go to Marination, like right next to the water taxi station, and I don't know if I'm allowed to say this, their Mai Tais are really good. So it's really great, you can like sit on the back patio, it's like a perfect view of the Seattle skyline. It's one of my all-time favorites.
Transit talks are turning into real talks. Love it. My name is Abel Pacheco, he, him. My favorite location, I'm gonna say it's two. One, Fogon and Capitol Hill, great happy hour. Both 3 to 6 and 9 to 12. Don't ask how I know, I just know. That's in on a sunny day, the Mountaineering Club. If you haven't had a chance, it's a rooftop deck right here. It's a nice place to grab a cocktail. So.
Thanks. Eli, Steffen, I use they, them. I'm gonna give two too. One's the station near the Beacon Hill Light Rail Station. It's happy hour all the time in my heart there. And also the Sam Sculpture Park, which is somewhat off all transportation, but not that far from a bunch, including the 8.
So I'm going to send this mic back that way so we can be efficient. Rhonda Carter, and she, her, and my life is very much driven by my 2.5-year-old's preferences. So she really likes the playgrounds that are at El Centro de la Raza, right off of Beacon Hill, and the playground that's right by the Federal Way Transit Center. Again, whoop whoop. That's very close to where my mom lives.
Cathy Jimenez, she, her. And I realized, like so many other people, my favorite places center around food or alcohol. So while the water taxi was my top, especially on a Friday leaving the office, I'm going to say the 57 down at Alki, stop over at Pepper Docks for some ice cream. Ice cream or alcohol?
I'm Alison Eisinger. I use she, her pronouns. And I will say I recently made a commitment with a friend of mine to do the ride transit to hiking locations this summer. So I'm looking forward to checking those options out. But as a New Yorker, I have to say taking the train all the way up to the Cloisters. If you've ever been there, it's incredibly beautiful, strange transportation of medieval cathedrals to the upper part of Manhattan, and with great views over the water and the Palisades. So that's what I did as a kid.
All right, so panelist presentations. I think Regina's going to be doing time checks. Yes, letting you know. She'll give you a 1-minute warning. Great. So let's see. We started with Abel last time. So why don't we start with Alison, since you have the mic.
I was wondering what order we were going to do this in, because Cathy and I have related things to talk about.
Oh, great. It's flexible if we want to spice it up.
I think it makes sense in this order. It's good. We can figure it out. Well, I thought that I would start. This is partly because after 10 years of working for the Public Health Department, I am done with PowerPoints, but I like show and tell. So I thought that it might be of interest to talk about, why is the Coalition on Homelessness and people who do education, advocacy, and organizing around issues related to homelessness and affordable housing involved in talking about transit. And the answers you might be able to guess include the fact that along with transportation, housing, education, we are living in an era in which we have increasing need for public goods and not sufficient support for those goods. So when I first came to the Coalition 12 years ago, one of the first things that I did was I talked to people all over, including people experiencing homelessness, in preparation for what my coalition at that time organized, which was the one-night count of people experiencing homelessness without shelter. And a man who was homeless at the time, named Randy Pelham, who was at many, many public meetings, came up to me and said, "You should count on the buses. They're rolling shelters." And I thought, well, that's very interesting. And so I asked a few other people what they thought about it, and they thought, well, maybe, yeah, I guess some people do. And then I kind of started hearing other things, and I did a little research, and it turns out that our local newspapers had actually done some articles about this. Well, we deployed special teams of people between 2 and 5 a.m. during the night owl bus service hours. And between those hours, unduplicated counted 174 people experiencing homelessness on one January night. So clearly, there's intersection there. Fast forward, that was in 2007, fast forward to 2011 when we learned that the ride-free area was going to be eliminated. And of course, many people who are not homeless also use the ride-free area, but it was of particular importance to folks who were unable to pay the fare. You'll have to come up afterwards and see this, but this is our Bus Rider Mad Libs advocacy tool that we created to help people do advocacy, which ultimately led to the Orca Lift program. Maybe I'll save this for later, but I also have a poem that I would like to share with you on the it's really a reflection on the topic of safety and transportation, written by an astonishing advocate in our community and a wonderful poet, Anitra Freeman, that we published in our annual report one year. So as we did more and more work with the Transportation Choices Coalition, Puget Sound Sage, One America, Transit Riders Union, around these intersections, one of the issues that came up, of course, was fare enforcement, and the way in which the King County Auditor's report documented that there were problems with the fare enforcement program was in part based on making some educated guesses based on people's addresses about whether or not they were stably housed. And in fact, we know that folks who are homeless experience crimes at much higher rates than people who have housing. They are in interactions with law enforcement of many sorts, more than other people who have somewhere indoors to go. And because of those reasons and because of not being able to afford fare, it's not too surprising to think that people experiencing homelessness or housing instability are disproportionately among those who are not able to pay and not paying their fares. What I think I want to note, because a lot of what we accomplished, I think Cathy will speak about, is that when these 5 organizations reached out to Rob Gannon at Metro to say, we are deeply concerned about this and we're not really interested in being in a long task force process. I think to his credit, he said, this agency is going to be responsive. We are going to put senior staff on working on this issue with you. We are going to listen to what you have to say. And among the things that Metro agreed to do was to suspend fare enforcement to get a good assessment of what is going on. And not too surprisingly, one of the things that they discovered was that for many, many people, the reason they were not paying their fare is because they couldn't afford it. So some really important good changes were made. It's not enough, not everything is perfect, but I think the spirit of partnership to look at that reality squarely in the face and make policy changes rapidly is a really important model for us to build. I'll end there.
Thank you. Good segue. Yeah, as Alison had mentioned, the King County Auditor's Report in April 2018 demonstrated that the outcomes of King County Metro's fare enforcement processes were really adversely impacting particularly vulnerable groups, such as housing unstable or very low and no income population. And King County Metro took a step back to learn more from our riders and community-based organizations who advocate for these riders. We convened a work group that spring, pretty quickly jumped on top of what the auditor's report demonstrated and wanted to learn more and tease out some more details. They came at it from a auditor's perspective, and we wanted to come at it from what will the riders tell us more about. So this stakeholder group was instrumental. The stakeholder group included TCC, Transit Riders Union, Seattle King County Coalition on Homelessness, Puget Sound Sage, and One America, along with some internal stakeholders who know our fare enforcement practices, our transit security practices, and bus operations. So the stakeholder group was instrumental in developing changes to our program. Some of our most significant efforts to date, and we've been doing this since summer of last year. In August and September of 2018, we conducted a survey study with our riders who did not or could not provide proof of payment for fare. So our fare enforcement operations looked the same this whole time, but instead of issuing a ticket or a warning or any kind of citation, our fare enforcement officers would conduct a survey with these individuals to find out more about why they weren't paying fare. One of the most significant pieces of data that came from that survey for me, and that continues to kind of be my lighthouse, is over half of those surveyed qualified for Orca Lift but weren't using it. And that really begged the question, why? Did they not have access to it? Is it a difficult process to get Orca Lift? Or is Orca Lift still too prohibitive for our riders? And so as we dug a little deeper into that, and our income-based fares team at Metro is also starting to, or is very much on the way of digging in deeper, we're finding that Orca Lift is still very prohibitive to especially our homeless populations and very low or no income riders. We also made changes to King County Code and Metro's policies around fare enforcement that allowed for us to completely separate our fare violations from the district courts altogether. So previously, when a fare enforcement officer issued a rider a ticket for not having proof of payment, it cost $124, and within 48 hours, it left Metro's hands and went straight to the district courts. So they would administer any kind of resolution of that ticket from that point forward. I think you would all agree that fare evasion's kind of on the level for me as like I didn't pay my parking or missed my parking time, and so if I got a $124 parking ticket, I'd be livid. So we also right-sized the consequences for fare evasion to emphasize a little bit more behavior modification and empowering our customers to ride right. So we lowered the cost of the fare violation ticket to $50, and if you were to pay it within 30 days, it would be $25. But we don't really focus on paying that ticket. The behavior modification comes in with enrolling in one of our reduced fare fair programs, and we help walk our customers or our people that are issued tickets, we help walk them through the enrollment process with Orca Lift or our RFP or obtaining a youth card. We have conducted a survey study kind of thing where in exchange for a survey completion that informs our income-based fares group, we provide you with a Orca Lift card that's preloaded with a certain amount of money so that we can help them learn how to use the Orca card system. We provide ongoing and specialized training for our fare enforcement team that enables them to perform their work focusing on serving our customers and empathy. And we developed more multilingual materials so all of our riders understand who our fare enforcement officers are, what their purpose is on our bus, and how they're there to serve them. That's just a few highlights of some of our big changes, and happy to answer questions later.
Thanks, Cathy. So fortunately, we have the benefit of KCM's, I'm here from Sound Transit, again, Rhonda Carter, and we are so fortunate to have you guys as partners and also as folks who can share some lessons learned in terms of what you've learned through the process that you guys went through last year as you are implementing this new program. So I'm really pleased to be here tonight. Thank you, TCC, for hosting us. I've been at Sound Transit for 2.5 years now, and it's been an exciting time since the passage of ST3 and being in the middle of this ambitious expansion program that we're now implementing. So to talk about fare enforcement, just to give a super brief history, we started our fare enforcement program back in 2009, so that coincided with the opening of Central Link, which was the original connection between Westlake Center and the airport. And it was within the board's wisdom at the time to say, okay, if we're going to design and build a barrier-free system, we're going to need a fare enforcement program in terms of folks checking proof of payment in order to verify that, to go hand in glove with that. So that's what informed the policy initially when it came online. And by traditional measures, we are highly effective, right? We can say that the complaints are relatively low. We can say that customers generally feel safe. And we can say that there is low fare evasion. But those are traditional measures, and we know that that does not tell the whole story, right, of what we need to be thinking about, especially in 2019, especially as we are touching more communities, as our ridership is becoming more diverse geographically among other kinds of demographics. And so we are in the interest of continuous improvement, in the interest of living up to our commitment to equity and balancing that with our very ironclad, or it feels ironclad, commitments to our fiduciary responsibility, right, to ride the system and for fare box recovery, not to get too geeky about it, but making sure that we're taking all of that in consideration as we think about what's next for our fare enforcement program. And so, thinking about equity, thinking about responsible financial stewardship, and thinking about aligning our program to our values. There are 6 of them, but the 3 that sort of stick out when we think about fare enforcement really are inclusion and respect, safety, and customer focus, right, and the customer experience. So before diving in further into the work that we are doing specifically on fare enforcement, I wanted to say that Sound Transit is on a journey when it comes to equity. And so about 1.5 years ago, we hired my awesome colleague, Jackie Martinez Vasquez, and she has spent the last 1.5 years building competency and capacity when it comes to competency. I think I said competency. Competency and capacity when it comes to equity. So people have a sense of what the concept is and understand how it applies to their lines of work, whether you're in security, whether you're in planning, whether you're in procurement and contracts, whether you're building what you're seeing out here. Understanding how equity translates to the work that we're doing across the agency, and that includes putting people through training, obviously, on that kind of stuff, putting together an equity policy that is going to be going to be agency-wide, and building a toolkit that we can use, our very, very own toolkit. So we got to use the RSJI toolkit that the City of Seattle has in the context of the work that we've been doing on West Seattle Ballard. And that actually has been that was a very helpful kind of pilot to understand how an equity lens and how an equity toolkit could work as applied to the work that we do. So, so with that as context in terms of what's happening agency-wide and what's been going on for the last year and a half, we about 4 months ago or so, the CEO said that we need to get a cross-functional team. I got the note that cross-functional sounds very bureaucratic, and it just came out of my mouth so smoothly, and I am ashamed. But basically, we got a bunch of folks from around the agency. Let me get folksy about it. We knew that this couldn't just be an effort that just lived with security, right? It needed to be something that had different lenses on it from across the agency, including communications, including equity and inclusion, including customer experience, because all of that matters. It's not just about the stats I just talked about, right? There's more to the issue. And so what we're actually doing right now is we're reviewing our training. It's been represented to us, and it's our understanding that currently fair enforcement officers, the ones that work for Sound Transit that are contracted with us, go through de-escalation and anti-bias and customer service. We want to see what that training is outside of the department that is currently running it, right? And we want to understand what that training is and understand how it benchmarks against other kinds of trainings and how effective it actually is. So we're looking at the effectiveness of our training practices. We need more data. Frankly, the data that we have is, there's a lot of it and it is robust, but it's from a very specific lens around how you typically measure these kinds of things. And so, for instance, we don't have a heat map for people who get caught for evasion, where do they get on? Where do they get off? What we currently document is where they got caught. And so what if there's a wayfinding issue that we don't know about? Sort of those kinds of things, so we can really understand the root causes of what's happening in the context of folks who need our services and are caught for fare evasion for one reason or another. Another thing we're doing is consulting, like I said, with our partners at King County Metro to help us understand the work that they did, and so that we can benefit from what they've done in terms of the information that they have, the surveying that they've done. And I'm stopping. I'm stopping, I promise. Okay. So just really quickly, I just want, I want to say that, so we're doing that. We are building our own research tool right now to get the information that we need for this. And we'll be engaging our partners in Snohomish, King, and Pierce counties in order for us to be able to really figure out for our system what the right regional approach will be to make sure that our outcomes match our intent. And our intent is to surely, ensure that our customer experience is as best as it can be, and it can't be if it's an inequitable experience for folks. So I'll stop there.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. My name is Steffen. I'm really grateful to be here. Thanks so much for all the work with Regina and everyone at Transportation Choices Coalition. I feel called just to sit a little bit in this question of this land acknowledgement, and I really appreciate it. And just for myself to wonder about what it means to have this conversation in the context of, for me at least, being a guest in this land. And I know that that's true for many of us. So I just feel called to say that. And I'm here representing a contingent of bus drivers who have a lot of concern about fair enforcement on our buses. And if you're interested in finding out more, I have some flyers with some contact info. And we're calling ourselves the Just Transit campaign. And really what we're about is that transit should just be transit, and that it shouldn't be policing. And that is really how we see fair enforcement as a policing law enforcement mechanism. So I'm a bus driver. I really love public transportation. I think it is really an amazing job and a really amazing opportunity to serve the public. And also it's really, it is very clear to me that transit is and needs to be treated as a right, as a human right, and as a necessity. And for me, I would say that that really should be at the forefront of our priorities. And I also honor that it's a challenge in our current system. So some of the things that we believe and that I really want to highlight is really coming from a standpoint that no one is disposable, and really interrogating and looking at in what ways does our system, and especially fair enforcement, treat members of our community as disposable, and who is getting prioritized by fair enforcement. We also believe that safety is a community endeavor that's best served without the police and without law enforcement mechanisms like fair enforcement. And that these mechanisms will inevitably skew towards racism, ableism, classism, and will harm these populations. And that one of the things we really also want to bring into this conversation is a vision of care on the buses. I think you know, in sort of this conversation, and both the kind of like the informal and formal, there's definitely, people have talked about this vision of the ways in which buses offer social service, offer social services. They offer shelter, and there are opportunities to really expand that, to have buses and transportation be a place where people get information, where people can access services, where people can access service if they need it. As a bus driver, personally, I will say, and there is a wide range of opinions, but I'm always happy to have someone come and hang out on the bus if that's what they need. And so I think that really of like, how do we, one of the things that we want to encourage and to foster more of, to recognize the ways in which it's happening, but to foster more of it is like, what is a culture of care on the buses? And what if the buses are really seen, and other transportation, you know, is really seen as a place where people get taken care of? And one of the things that I also just want to bring into the conversation is that people, that fair enforcement has and will in the future escalate to the point of people losing their lives. So I also, for me, feel like, and I think everyone here probably shares this, but that it's a very serious issue, and that it is oftentimes a life and death issue. To name one person, Oscar Perez Giron, July 1st, 2014, lost his life because of an escalated situation with fair enforcement. And I understand that what happened over that situation is contentious, but my understanding, and I think most people would agree, is he got pulled off a train because he didn't pay his fare, and it ended with him losing his life. And so I want to ask, what is 275 worth? And ultimately what we call for is a fair, free transit system, thank you. And that is really possible, that there are 56 municipalities around the world who have a completely fair, free system, and we could be one of them. And that is a way that ultimately serves us towards this vision of care. And that one of the things that we want to call out and just name is that, so this metaphor was offered to me of like the moldy bread, and no disrespect but meant to any people, but we definitely see fair enforcement as a moldy bread, and that there's this idea of reforming it that will trim off the mold and then the bread will be great. And sometimes that's necessary. Like, I have certainly eaten bread that had to be trimmed, but really I think our goal should be to like find some different bread, to find some like totally healthy, nutritious bread. And so we challenge, we appreciate and honor all of the reforms that have, we honor the efforts that have been made, and some of the reforms we really support, but we also believe that reform is not actually the end solution, that really we should be getting rid of fair enforcement. And I'll highlight one thing within that, is that even within these great reforms and these explorations of equity and inclusion and respect, we see a fairly massive, that might be a strong word, we see certainly a large increase in the police budget on Metro, and want to call out any expansion of policing in Metro as really moving away from this vision of care. I think I'll end there. Thanks.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for spending dinner with us. So I've been on this job for the last couple of months, so I've had a very, I think, unique perspective, and I say that because I recognize that so much of the work that, I want to recognize the efforts that have been done by some people on this table in the sense of, what the progress that we've made. But also, the kind of the dream, and what's the dream, right? And it's free transit. As someone who, as the youngest member of the council, someone who doesn't have a car, thank you for your work. You get me around from point A to point B all the time. So that's, to me, I think, the direction we should be going as a community moving forward. That's the dream, ideally. Now that I'm 8 weeks on the job, I have the opportunity of following the shoes of Rob Johnson, who was the former ED of the Transportation Choices Coalition. But it's really because of advocates like him who have allowed me to give up not having a car, or giving me the opportunity to not have a car. And it's because we try to focus and advocate for transit-oriented development and making sure that we're doing projects that allow us to focus our growth around transit. Why this work's important? Disproportionately, we know that these issues of enforcement impact communities of color, immigrant communities, and so what we can do in the meantime, I think, is look into the bias training that we provide for enforcement officers, or look into what we're doing with regards to how that training is developed, and then look to see, eventually, again, with the goal being ideally that we get to a point where we don't have to deal with fair enforcement ultimately by having just free transit in our community, because I think that's ultimately going to be a priority for us as a community. So want to leave it there so that we can have more time for question and answers, and we go from there.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing, all of you. Really appreciate your honesty and passion behind all of the work that you've all been doing, and showing up in that way for this conversation today. So thanks again. I'm going to say thank you a lot, by the way. I am a social worker, so it's like kind of in my hard drive at this point. Awesome. So I have a couple of follow-up questions for you all, and then I'll give you all a chance to respond to each other. Where to start? I guess we can just go back down the line. So Alison, I know you put in a lot of really incredible work fighting for Orca Lift, and we really appreciate the work that you did. I know my work with U District Let's Go, a big part of that was actually hosting Orca Lift enrollment events. So a lot of what you said really, resonated with me. Of people want to register for Orca Lift, but it's still too expensive, even though it is a low-income fare. So I'm really curious about your opinion about the changes that we've seen within fare enforcement within King County Metro, and kind of how you see those changes as, if you see those changes as getting a step closer to reaching more equitable opportunities for transportation access within King County.
I will start by saying that while we fought indeed very hard for the Orca Lift program to exist, and we were really adamant that it needed to be broadly applicable, and that is why we've worked so hard to make sure that it would be available for people up to 200% of the federal poverty level. And I think it still is the broadest, deepest low-income fare program anywhere in the nation. And that is significant, but every step of the way, we said out loud that if you have no money, half price is still too expensive. So we went into that knowing that it would not address all issues related to access, particularly for the lowest income people. One of the things I think may be worth stating explicitly is that we have seen such an increase in the cost of living, not only in rent, but in the cost of all sorts of things that we need to live as human beings, and at the same time a suppression of the basic core benefits, that people may not quite realize just how little money or no money a lot of folks have in this community. People who are lucky enough to spend years getting Social Security disability assistance, for example, are at about 11% of the area median income in this community. So it really makes a difference whether you're asked to pay $1.50 or whether you are able to get on for less than that. That is all by way of saying, with genuine respect for the work to reform fair enforcement, I don't think that fair enforcement changes and improvements change access. I think the reality is we don't actually need a whole lot more information to tell us that there are tens of thousands of people in this community who don't have the money to make the current Orca Lift program work for them. And there are a lot of people for whom even the subsidies of a disabled or senior pass means going through a lot of processes that may be barriers. I'm not saying those programs aren't good and worthwhile. I'm saying that they don't necessarily take us all the way to full access for people who face the most barriers. And this is important because we all benefit when people can get where they need to go on transit. So I want to underscore something that doesn't get said enough, which is, in addition to taking the fair enforcement tickets out of the court system, what King County Metro did was, this may not be the correct legal term, but it vacated, it dropped 20,000, thank you, fair enforcement violation charges. That is huge. And that, I think, is an important thing for the general public to understand, because that starts to get at the cycle of inequity, really, that we put poor people through. And poor people are far more likely to be people experiencing disabilities, people of color, and people who are facing a lot of other barriers. I hope that answered your question sufficiently, Laura. So the answer is it's good, but that's not access.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for sharing. Rhonda, I really appreciated what you were sharing about you being able to hire Jackie and Sound Transit, really trying to make more of a commitment to how they look at equity, and specifically, like, you know, what kind of subconscious biases are there with our fair enforcement, and how does that impact safety of riders on light rail. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more to how Sound Transit prioritized sort of like an analysis of the current system as opposed to like making more direct changes to fair enforcement, sort of like the King County Metro track. And I think that question also comes from a place of like, when I think of light rail, I think of fair enforcement officers, and I think that matches what a lot of the community sees. So I'm curious if you could just speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, so we're looking into the current state essentially because we don't feel that the information that we have tells the full regional story around what the barriers our riders throughout the region are facing. So we have pretty good data when it comes to the central area, right? But I can't tell you that I have engaged, or that we've engaged at folks in Bonnie Lake who connect to the Sounder, right? And what their perspective on fair enforcement is. And also we have a slightly different governance structure in that we have 18 board members who represent jurisdictions all up and down the whole region. And so the notion is, as a regional provider, we really do need to make sure that we've got the right information, the right input, and that it is as diverse as the entire region we cover, in order to make sure, again, that there's that balance between our commitment to equity, because it's certainly there, and we're building the capacity for it and all of that. But we also have there are very high expectations from the federal government on down that we will also keep our commitment to fare box recovery, that we will keep our commitment to having a low fare evasion rate, and a strong belief that when it comes to the behavioral aspect of I guess, fare compliance, that actually part of that is a leading indicator in terms of the quality of our entire system. And so, so basically, we just want to make sure that we've got the right information, and we're trying to do this on as quick a timeline as we can in order to get to the right solutions. But we want to make sure we're engaging folks up and down our system, all around our system, people who use different modes and who encounter fare enforcement. So we really understand what the root cause is, because what I think would be the worst, or I mean, there are worse things, but I think it would not serve our riders very well if we decided internally, based on information that we don't fully have the story around, that we decided on a reform, roll it out, and educate people on it, and communities are like, what is this? Nobody asked for this. We want to make sure that if we're going to roll out the reforms that we're sort of thinking about, that they have adequate input. And so I think the regional nature of our service and of our governance structure sort of demands it. So.
Yeah, thanks for saying that. I think a lot of times people forget that there is this higher governing board that makes a lot of decisions. And a lot of times that can be a huge barrier for how we get things done in the timelines that are set to continue on this work.
Well, the other thing I'll say is that when you have board members, though, who are engaged and who want to push for solutions in the context of that, I mean, we've seen this in countless examples, but when you have them on the same page and they want to push for something that's going to work, that can also be a huge benefit. So it cuts both ways.
Yeah, totally. Awesome. Thanks for sharing all that. So just for the sake of time also, Eli and Abel, I'm sorry if you can try and keep your responses like 2-3 minutes so that you all can still discuss with each other and we can get to some of the audience questions. Okay, great. So Eli, you are on the bus almost every day, if not every day, as a writer yourself. And I think a lot of times, people see fare enforcement on transit, and they don't always see the impact of fare enforcement on transit. And I'm wondering if you could speak to your experiences, both personally and professionally, of kind of how you've seen fare enforcement on transit impact your riders' feelings of safety and inclusivity.
Sure. Yeah, can I just speak to two things that I heard, which I just really like, and just want to name. One of which is that I've heard at least 4 out of the 5 panelists say that a fare-free transit system would be awesome. So that's cool. There's a lot of agreement, at least on that. And I also just want to name, or just call out, Alison, I think you said something to the effect of that, or what I heard was that if not everyone has access, then it's not access. And I don't mean to put words in your mouth, but I really appreciate that, and I'll put those words in my mouth in terms of really where is the, who's gets centered, and just to name that, and for example, I totally honor the point that you can use Orca with all the various transit systems, but actually people who have Orcas can't actually necessarily afford it. I speak for myself as someone who goes to Vashon often. I oftentimes have had trouble just being able to pay that with Orca. And so just to name some of those things, in terms of the effect, for me, and it's just on a personal thing, I find it scary when fare enforcement gets on the bus. I had someone the other day come up to me, in fact, yesterday, and their translator had just expired, and they literally said to me, will you give me a new one, because I don't want to have to deal with, and they said the word Nazis. And that's probably, that's extreme for what I would say, but I think that there's a lot of fear and hostility around the interactions with fare enforcement. I don't know anyone who's like, yay, fare enforcement's on the bus. That's so great. And that could be. We could have a system, I don't think it could be fare enforcement, but we could have a system where people got on the bus and people were like, oh, awesome. here are the ambassadors, right? I can ask them a question about how to get to blank, or, oh, I can sign up for Lyft, or they can talk to me about why, like, the money I put on Orca hasn't got on there yet, or maybe they have bottles of water, or, like, these things actually could happen. And so, yeah, I think fair enforcement's, it's scary for a lot of folks. I think for folks who have a fear around law enforcement, and just like also to just name that it's like not just like a random, like that also like it tends to be like law enforcement tends to disproportionately impact people of color and disabled people and you know poorer folks. And just one story that I'll share is I've actually heard a couple of different stories of people getting on in the back and trying to move forward and having disabilities. And fair enforcement gets on the front, and I'm not sure if this is policy or not, but I know fair enforcement people who practice this, which is if you pay after they got on the bus, that's a citation or a warning. And I've heard several stories of people who have been attempting to move forward to pay and have not made it there in time because it's hard. I mean, it can be hard for people to move while the bus is moving, and have been, you know, have paid, gotten their transfer, and then been taken off the bus or cited. So yeah.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I think that those stories are so critical to this conversation and really like humanizing the issue for a lot of people of like, you know, we see fair enforcement, like you said, people don't really see fair enforcement get on the bus and think, oh yay. But I think the impact looks very different for different people. And the more we talk about the realities of that, I think the closer we can get to creating solutions to really make transit more accessible for folks. And last but certainly not least, Abel. I know most recently you were working in the Office of Minority Affairs at UW, which is awesome. Go dogs, I guess that's what people say. I'm really bad at school spirit. So how do you want to use that experience, or how do you want to apply that experience to your time as a council member, and kind of how we shape the conversation around transportation and inclusivity?
So I just really quickly want to address kind of a broader point first, and then kind of building on Eli's point about free transit. You know, from a larger systemic lens, thinking this at a 30,000 foot level, you know, since we're kind of building on the dream, I would say, you know, one transit pass across the country. So that, for, you know, just building on the dream. Yeah, you know, and part of it is a community. Seattle's one of the few communities a few cities in the country that's actually seen ridership go up, and so, and it's because I think we collectively prioritize. Seattleites love transit, but we prioritize the movement of the collective, and because we know it minimizes the gridlock, and we know that it's a way for us to address issues of climate change, and as well as to reduce single occupancy trips and so forth. So I would say that, you know, it's part of the reason why I think as a society we should be moving in that direction. Now, with regards to your second or your question, you know, my experience at working for the Office of Minority Affairs, for so many systems, unfortunately, people of color are getting the short end of the stick, and that's been by design. And so, trying to improve the systems, whether that's in transit or educational systems or systems around development, those are the things that I'm trying to hopefully keep a lens on in terms of how I move during my time in office for the remainder of the year. Specifically with fair enforcement, we know that because enforcement and enforcement mechanisms are disproportionately impacting people of color, we'll also see the escalation when we see incidents that escalate. We're also going to be the recipients of these incidents when they do escalate. And so this is part of the reason that I think when I think about how all these systems interact and engage with each other, why I think not only is it important for us to remove the barriers of transit and those who use transit, but why we should not have in an ideal in dream world not have the need to pay for fares. And I'm willing to pay a little higher taxes. Alison and I were chatting earlier privately, and I was saying to her, just it used to be that we cared as a community about our social fabric, and I think we're in Seattle, at least we're breaking the mold in some ways, especially around transit, and so hopefully we're able to keep working towards that dream collectively to ultimately have free transit in our city. So.
Awesome, thanks for sharing that. And yeah, I think that especially the racial equity lens, applying that to the work that we're doing as we move forward is super critical. So thanks for your work. So I want to give you all a chance to respond to each other, as promised. So I think we can kind of just pass the mic along. I know some of you have already responded to each other in your answers, which is great. So maybe like 2 minutes to respond as the spirit moves you, as Regina was saying. And I will continue to sort through questions. If you have any more, feel free to pass them up while our panelists are talking to each other.
I think I kind of responded already, so.
Yeah.
I just want to acknowledge Rhonda's great job at detailing kind of the regulations that King County Metro and Sound Transit alike need to adhere to, which is our federal funding regulations and why we have kind of a standard of fare box recovery, why fare enforcement is kind of necessary for us. While Sound Transit started in 2009 and we started in 2010, we have similar reasons for why we need to do fare enforcement, why we're required to do it. One of the things that I wanted to point out that we've touched a lot on is King County Metro's effort to develop an income-based fare. We have a team that fare enforcement actually is working really closely with, and we provide a lot of data to at King County Metro that's working on a tiered fare system. Maybe tiered is not the right word, but a fare that addresses those that Alison is referring to that are below the 200% federal poverty level that Orca Lift does not meet the needs for. And one of the great gifts that we were given by our audit is the data that we got to start with that Sound Transit is now needing to search for in their system. So we were kind of given a gift with this audit last year, and it kind of catapulted us into digging for more data, and that data has now been really, really valuable to our income-based fares team who's developing more in the realm of fare resources for King County Metro. But I want to say that that's King County Metro, and as I alluded to before, we have lots of transit service providers in our region. All of them intersect in downtown Seattle to a certain degree, and when King County Metro is the only one offering a particular fare resource, it again creates this disjointed service for those of the highest need for access to transit. So creating a system that feeds each other is really critical. And King County Metro is starting to scratch the surface there, but I just wanted to bring that up as the data that fare enforcement collects being valuable to lots of other places in Metro. It impacts our ORCA system, it impacts our income-based fares work, and other policies that Metro is taking a look at. It's a very customer-centered data that is really valuable, has lots of tentacles to other things that Metro is doing.
I wanted to respond to something that Rhonda mentioned that relates to what Cathy just said. I think you said that Sound Transit is working on designing a research tool to gather information. And what I'd like to say is my organization and other advocacy groups would like to offer you the benefit not only of our specific knowledge and that of our members and the people we serve, but also our experience working with Metro. And I hope you'll take us up on that. I think the opportunity exists before us to, for example, say, here is a regional resource that that is perhaps going to do some things differently, but that is going to also not delay the process, simply by virtue of being big and broad, because I think we can probably agree that equity is a regional value. But what it looks like in practice is, of course, what really matters. And sometimes I like to think that we are in the business of reality-based policy work. And sometimes it really helps to start with the basics of, what is the bus driver's experience? What are the riders' experiences? And what do we know? We actually know quite a bit about the extent to which many households and many families, including folks who are working, are struggling to make ends meet. And so all of these initiatives to give free passes to high school students, to subsidize fare for elders and for people experiencing disabilities, are an attempt to recognize that reality and respond to it. But what if there's an opportunity to really think globally and holistically about that in our biggest regional transit system and kind of work off of what we already know? So I think that would be, a true success. I don't want to predict it. It's a true opportunity to think bigger and to have these smaller initiatives that have really been very well received by the public in general inspire something that is even more broad and transformative.
Laura, do I have time to say one more thing? I don't.
Yeah,
It's brief. I don't mind. I don't want to put you on the spot anymore, Rhonda, but I also wanted to touch on something. While financial stewardship of our systems is definitely a shared Metro and Sound Transit responsibility, the safety that our riders feel in accessing both of our systems, I heard Rhonda mention we feel strongly about it, King County Metro, and I just wanted to mention that in addition to the changes to fare enforcement and the work that we're doing to change the culture within our fare enforcement operations, we also have some inclusion work that we've done with the Report It to Stop It campaign, human trafficking awareness, and the Safe Place program for youth and the Night Stop program. The youth can get on board any of our buses and ask for a safe place at any time. And the Night Stop program allows people to request to get off the bus outside of a normal bus stop location for their own safety. Any of that information is over on the table where all the swag is, so I just wanted to point that out and share.
I just wanted to say quickly, thank you to Abigail. We are going to be doing some outreach in terms of, especially with a focus on our most vulnerable populations. So that includes LGBTQ, that includes, because I can give you a stat, can rattle off that, the vast majority of our folks feel safe on our system, but I can't tell you what that is by perception, by group. And so do women feel safe on our system? I hope so, and I would assume so, but I don't know. Same thing with other vulnerable populations. So that's more information that we are going to be getting, hopefully in the next few months. And we would definitely benefit from your expertise. So thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, I want to just say a couple of things. One of which is it's interesting that you named the safe space. That the buses are a safe space, which is awesome, and they should be, and bus drivers get no training. Like literally, I found that out in a poster in the bathroom. And that's not good. And partially I say that, and it's a part of this conversation because it's about where we're putting our resources, right? That there are a lot of resources going to fare enforcement. In 2016, it was $1.7 million. And as far as I know, and certainly I have not, as a bus driver, gotten any training in what it means to be a safe space. Like if someone comes up to me and says, hey, I need a safe space, I call my supervisor, and maybe I get a call back. I usually get a call back, but it could take some while. So I just want to name that, and then I also want to just go back to this idea of is it possible, and what is it? How might we imagine a fare-free system in this complex system? Right, it is a really complex system, and how do we move towards that, I think, is also a question. So some of the things that I'm really curious about are, it seems to me that fair enforcement costs considerably more than than it brings in, certainly in terms of the penalties that are paid. And maybe people can correct me on that. And I wonder if there's a better use of that money. And also the audit, my understanding is it was inconclusive as to whether fair enforcement actually improves people actually paying the fare. And so again, I question if our goal is to have people paying the fare, is fair enforcement the best way? And are there actually better ways to do that? That don't involve law enforcement and that don't involve situations that can escalate and disproportionately impact people that we've already named, but it's worth naming again: people of color, disabled folks, poor, low-income folks. So yeah, I think that those are just some things that I wanted to bring into the conversation, and to just to part of this conversation, and there is the need for financial stewardship, and I really appreciate that, and just honor that it's a hard-ass job. So I do get that. I am really glad it's not my job. But also, as a community, how do we talk about where the resources are going, and are they doing what we say we want them to do?
Just really quickly, in acknowledging just the federal framework, this is why I said, one transit pass for major cities, because the federal government can't give you conditions to when we accept funds. Now, having said that, to credit to Sound Transit and I think King County Metro is that one of the recent victories on an alternative for paying for fare enforcement was to perform 2 hours of community service. So I think that in itself of how they're taking I would say it's a bit of an innovative approach to just how we address some of these challenges. And so I want to give credit to where credit's due too.
Awesome. Just really want to reiterate how humbled I am to be sitting at this table with all of you. Y'all are great. I will say more about that later. So we got some questions from the audience, and actually quite a few of them were about this idea of a fare-free world. So I kind of mashed a few of them together into one question that I think hopefully covers the questions that were asked. So, okay, so what are the strategies for considering a fare-free system in Seattle/Puget Sound? Is it really feasible? And I think the next part of this is really, how do we sell this to voters as something that's worth implementing? If we could try and keep the responses to 1 to 2 minutes, elevator speech type responses, just for the sake of time. Yeah.
There's people much better qualified to actually answer that question, but I just wanted to add to this question of, is also an in-between step of a fair enforcement-free transit system.
So the fare-free system, as I had mentioned before, it's something that that King County Metro, I think the baby step towards looking at that is the data that income-based fares team in Metro is collecting right now. They're working with community-based organizations that are already providing transportation services to homeless population, to mental health, to disabilities, employee provided passes, and that kind of thing. So they're working with a lot of community stakeholders on who pays for that transit, where does that funding actually come from, what do people actually need for it to be free to the user. I think that that's a baby step in the right direction, but to launch kind of a regional approach to what it would take would probably be an effort that would be a collective public engagement. What are you willing, what are you capable of paying, what kind of mechanism should we create? Anything from something like a water district type funding, like a transit district type funding, kind of like City of Seattle has in City of Seattle, but a regional. And historically that's been voted down, but it could be that the climate changes around that, no pun intended. I'm not quite sure where we would start with that, to be honest. I don't know that fair enforcement is the place to start that, although the data that we have to elevate forward in that conversation is really valuable.
I mean, I guess the only thing that I would add to that is that we're not going to regressively tax our way out of this, right? And so there are some bigger questions about how funding happens generally for social services and for publicly minded services that needs to be had in this state, right? Generally, and so the income tax is what I'm thinking of. So, so I'm not advocating for anything in particular, but I just think that it's going to be a much bigger question than, say, the Sound Transit Taxing District alone can answer, and that there's just a much bigger conversation about how we fund these kinds of things, because I think often what happens just sort of generally is that that's suddenly where the money feels like it's run out, right? Like, oh, kids need new textbooks, oh, all out, right? And that is a mindset, that is a framework that is politically successful, not just here, you know, in this country. And so it's a really, really big question. So that's the only thing I'd add to that.
I was going to say, you know, one of the things you learn really quickly in this job is how much the state limits us in terms of our taxing authority and just the challenges with the regressive tax structure of the state. Having said that, you know, I actually think that if we were to put this on a ballot initiative for free transit in Seattle, I have a funny feeling that it would likely win. That's just my gut, but I don't know for sure. But you know, if it was on the ballot, I'd vote for it. So.
One thing I also just wanted to say is just to like recognize and honor that we don't pay for parks. I mean, we do, but you don't pay when you go to the park. You know, you don't put a quarter in the street light when you want it to go on, and you don't pay for most roads that you drive on. And so there are models actually already in existence on like how do we pay for public services. And one of the things I also just want to bring in, and I'm really appreciative of like the equity lens that has been brought to some of the work in the future planning, and would encourage that in this, because taxation in this state sucks, and it hurts people, and it hurts the people who most need help. And but I do just want to say that it's not like the craziest idea that you don't have to pay when you utilize public services. There are a lot of ones that work that way.
Any other final thoughts on that question? Good. Think about it. Okay. Great. Thank you for sharing. Yeah, it's a huge question. And if anyone wants to write that initiative, now's your time. All right. So we also had 2 questions about safety on transit, pretty explicitly around, well, kind of different issues. So safety for riders and also safety for transit operators. So a couple examples were given about, you know, people smoking on the bus, you know, things escalating when the driver asks them to put the cigarette out, people, you know, showing up on the bus under the influence of alcohol or another substance, and again, being aggressive with the driver. And then on the other side, hate crimes happening on the bus, either between riders or, well, I think it's mostly between riders in this example, but sort of how do we balance these like very real fears and threats of what's happening on the bus and still support transit systems and encourage people that, how do we, you know, focus on changing that culture within transit to make transit feel safer to people who have historically disproportionately been impacted?
I can say from my conversations with Metro Transit Police that typically have to do with fare enforcement, where fare enforcement starts and ends, and where Metro Transit Police picks up and takes it from there. Metro Transit Police is very focused on crimes against person or safety concerns, and that can be anything from our transit operators being in danger to our riders being in danger or a perceived danger. and the connection between our transit control center, our operators, and our Metro Transit Police is a very tight connection. In fact, Metro Transit Police and fare enforcement have separated so much so that we've even taken our fare enforcement off of the radio dispatch that used to be shared with Metro Transit Police in order to give free airspace for those most urgent, most critical safety concerns that Metro Transit Police needs to respond to. Eli, you mentioned earlier an increase in the transit police budget, and what I do know of is an increase in FTE asks for the Metro Transit Police budget. And what I also know from recent conversations with Metro Transit Police is that while we are the 7th largest transit agency in the nation, we have the 3rd or 4th biggest Metro Transit Police agency. So we have an incredibly small resource allocated to a very big agency and a very robust service. And we have seen an increase in hate crimes. We have seen shootings occur right off of our buses, or guns that have been found on our buses. We have Eric Stark was recently our bus operator that was involved in the shooting. I believe that's his name. And so we have seen an increase where our Metro Transit Police, their awareness of what's happening in our community and the demand on safety in our community, just by the sheer density of our region right now, could be a big factor. But they are very aware of their minimal resources for a large agency, and that is one of the biggest reasons why that budget did increase, was for those FTE asks so that they could be immediately responsive for the safety of our riders and our operators and for nothing else. So when it comes to fare enforcement, Metro Transit Police does not deal with fare enforcement at all. There's a very bold divide between fare enforcement and Metro Transit Police, but the safety of our riders is their paramount purpose.
So I think some things that I would say is, one, from the Just Transit campaign and from my own personal opinion, I would push back on the idea that police make things safer. And again, I would say for whom. So I think, one, I would say that I and my campaign, or this campaign, is really in favor of no expansions in police. I don't think it makes people safer. And one of the things that I'll also say is, again, I'll go back to training and training operators. So another example of no training, Metro, maybe it was less than a year and a half ago, about a year or maybe even less, rolled out this sort of anti-sexual harassment campaign. And again, I learned about it from a flyer. And there's been no training. The training was a flyer. We got a flyer for like, here's what to do. And so again, I think that's ways of making metros safer is offering training to drivers, and also I think to riders. I'm really curious about what does it mean to create a culture of care and safety among the riders. I've seen many times where people will, like, I remember I was a time on this bus a little while ago, and this guy started talking to this person, and I couldn't hear, in part because I just had surgery, and another passenger moved forward and just stood in front of him. Right, and that was it. And they started to get in a little conflict, and then the guy gets off, and essentially he was being racist to someone. I've seen many moments of mostly, I think all the ones I've seen are men who will move forward or move to position themselves to be among women, or to, I've seen other instances of sexual harassment. And again, it's like I'm having to make up what to do on the spot. And there are no police or fare enforcement people around, which honestly I'm grateful for. But this question of what does it mean to hold safety as a community endeavor, rather than to hand it over to armed people. Yeah.
So I caught the 44. Like at 1:30 in the morning from Ballard. I didn't even know this, but it's called like the party bus. The bus driver was the one that told me this. And then I'll give you another quick story. One time I was catching the 65 from the light rail station going home, and this guy's jamming some Nipsey Hussle. Now a part of me was like, ooh, appreciate the song, but he was just blasting it through the bus. The challenge is, from a policy perspective, is how do you regulate, and Carlene knows this, I don't have a lot of rules in life. One of them is don't be an asshole. And so it is really hard to regulate people when they make, I would say, unconsiderate choices. But I think that one of the things that the city and the county has improved is data collection efforts, and how we collect the data. We're doing a much better job and we have seen rise in hate crimes, and as a community we do find those crimes to be intolerable, and so how do we find the framework and provide the framework by which we can regulate that and ensure that it doesn't happen in the safety of all of our residents. But that's I would say a little bit of a fine line. Like, we can't go too far because I'll tell you, the guy was with the Nipsey, going back to the Nipsey Hussle story, I just said, hey, can you turn it down a little bit? And he was real cool about it. He turned it down. So, but it's hard. I mean, that's the balance between, from my role, at least in my perspective, is how do you ensure that the safety of the collective, at the same time, try to at least, and when I can on an individual basis, try to say, hey, don't be a jerk. So.
I do appreciate the spirit of asking the question about what it is that we want any policing entity to do, and under what circumstances is safety increased by having law enforcement present. Setting aside whether or not an abolitionist approach to law enforcement is a possibility in our current society, I think it's important for the transit agencies who, let's be clear, contract out these activities to other agencies, set the tone and are very clear about what the expectations are and what the priorities are and what it is that they are asking for policing entities to do. And that's where there's a real opportunity to distinguish between what are real threats to safety and well-being and what relates to perception. When we interacted with Metro a number of years ago, there was at the time a suggestion that all night owl buses were going to stop at a particular part of downtown, and the Metro police officers would get on and do a check of some sort of the bus. And they were going to wake up anybody who was sleeping, and they were going to have all passengers disembark. And the idea was that they would do some sort of a sweep of the bus, and the driver would get a break, and this was somehow going to be beneficial. And we spent a lot of time, and we appreciated being brought into the conversation so that we could spend a lot of time explaining that for people who are sleep deprived, for people experiencing homelessness, for people who have been through a lot of trauma, being woken up by a uniformed, armed person, even if that person is not wishing you harm, can be really bad and can escalate in some cases, and that did not seem to us to be a very good idea. And balance that against a driver's need to have a break, whatever the lead time issues were that Metro was trying to solve for. I mean, I acknowledge that there's complexity there, but that was an example really of being able to say, look, do you really need people to get off the bus? What is the point of doing that? Especially if the argument is you're doing a safety check. I mean, there's a threat to people's safety to have to be interacted with in that way. So I don't wish to oversimplify these issues, but I do think it's an opportunity for Sound Transit and for Metro to be really, really clear with their contractors what it is that they are being asked to do and what they should not do or back off on. We have to talk about what actual safety is.
Thank you for that. Just to add on to that, King County Metro contracts with King County Sheriff's Office. I think Sound Transit contracts with King County Sheriff's Office as well for our police force on transit. And I love this question is, what is it that we want the police to do and under what circumstances? I think about Eli's scenario that you shared of the customer that just stood in the middle. And then I think about the security videos that I've seen where a guy pulled out a gun out of his backpack and shot another rider just getting off the bus. And it turns out that the rider that got shot also had a gun in his backpack. What does that look like when guns are introduced to that situation and a customer stands in the middle of it? It puts our customers' safety at risk. It puts our operations at risk. It puts you at risk. So the question really is, like, what is it that we want our police to do and under what circumstance? When is it appropriate? And you have such a difficult job that I so appreciate the complexity of, is determining when do you make that call? This situation is escalating and it looks like I have a good community of care on my bus and my customer is stepping in on the behalf of another customer. That's awesome. And I would love to see that too, but at the same time, that can go wrong in a split second. And at what time do you say, I need something else that I don't have, but a police officer can help me with?
And the only thing that I'll add to that, this is not like an official policy position, but it's just got me thinking in the context of, I think often we think about safety and the definition of safety as sort of a zero-sum thing, right? In order for these people to feel safe, these other people cannot feel safe. Or in order for these people to feel safe, these other people will feel unsafe. And so how do we think transformationally about collective community safety? What does that mean for everybody who's on the bus? And how do we transcend this very, where it's zero sum, where, you know, somebody might be disturbed by somebody else and you end up with like a barbecue Becky situation or whatever meme is going on, right? In terms of just somebody just living and it's their existence that's bothering you, right? And how do you balance all of that? So it's just something that I'm going to be thinking about in the context of the work that we're doing.
Yeah, one thing I'll just say, which is just interesting, like this example of the gun, which is, as Metro driver, we're taught that people can get on the bus with guns. That's the law of this. That's my understanding. That's what I've been told oftentimes. And so, which is scary. And I guess one of the things that I'm also curious about, and I also appreciate this, that it's not a zero sum, or how do we consider that, but is, for me, it would be nice to have someone that I could invite, that I could call, that I had confidence wasn't going to escalate and wasn't going to lead to people getting killed. And I don't have that confidence in the police. And there really isn't much else. I mean, I can call a supervisor, and that's about it. So I also wonder about how do we, and I appreciate this, like this call for like community, how do we think about it, and what are community-wide mechanisms? But yeah, it is scary, and I don't know that the police make it safer for everyone, and that's my priority.
Awesome. Well, on that note, I think that is the end of our time as a panel. I know. Especially, you know, like having you all have the chance to respond to each other and with the audience, you know, it just makes me realize how needed conversations like this are with folks in our community and how we just need to have more conversations about this.